we'll be adding a new Google property. We'll start by going into the correct organization and hitting Add New Property. The property name can be anything that we choose. And then in this case, we're selecting Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics. We also have a box here for custom components, and this determines which items we bring in from the agency that we're associated with and the organization that this property will be a part of. In some cases, organizations or agencies create custom records to be made available to all properties within those groups. By default, these items are enabled, and typically we want to keep those enabled. We'll hit Next, and we'll get a prompt that will be charged for this property. This is not true for sandbox accounts or properties that you've already contractually agreed to, but in instances where you're creating a new property that is as yet unknown and is not part of a test account, then this does apply. So we'll hit Continue. We're prompted to enter our data layer name, which by default for Google Properties is just data layer. And we also have the option to connect to GitHub. If I click this, I'll be prompted to sign in to GitHub, and this will allow me to publish my specifications for my data layer out to GitHub later on. I'll hit Next. And here's where I start looking at my Google Cloud Platform settings. There's an article at this link, Learn How to Connect with a Google Cloud Service Account, that will go through all of the steps that your Google Cloud Platform Administrator will follow in order to get the information that you need to enter on this screen. So if we go over to that article, you'll see the details on the link to Google Cloud Console, exactly how things need to be set up for this to work correctly, instructions on how to create a Google Cloud project, associate the appropriate APIs for the project, and then create a service account. Once the service account is created, then you'll generate a private key for that account, which will come out in the form of a JSON file, which is what we need in order to import the correct settings. Once that JSON file is created, we have what we need for the connection. But in order for things to work, make sure to follow the steps toward the bottom of the document to grant access to the service account email in Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics successfully. It's worth noting that if you are part of an agency doing work for a client, it is the client's Google Cloud Platform where this will need to be generated. I have the option to import my JSON key file, and I'll make sure that I open that JSON file in a plain text editor so I don't introduce any special characters that I'm not expecting. And once I paste this in, I'll hit Parse, and the appropriate fields are populated. I can give this connection a name, and then I'll also enter my GTM account ID, which if you go into Google Tag Manager and review the URL when you're in a given Google Tag Manager instance, there's a piece of the URL that has account in it, and then there are some numbers after that piece, and that's what you'll enter into this field. Once I've entered all of this, I'll hit Test, and then I see that I'm successfully connected. So I'll hit Next. Then I'll select the appropriate account, account type, and property that are based on the access that I've successfully granted to that Google Cloud Platform account. So depending on where I plan to work with, I'll select those details. I can hit Next once I've entered those, and then I'm prompted as to whether or not I want to map an existing implementation. And this means in the case of the Google ecosystem, if I am migrating from Universal Analytics to GA4, then I want to map an existing GTM container to GA4 and use the same triggers where possible to create GA4 events. That's what the Map Existing feature will allow me to do. If I'm starting over on a new GA4 implementation, or I'm planning to make updates and modifications to my data layer, then that would be a new GA4 implementation, so I would not want to map an existing implementation. In this case, I'll hit No, I'm done. And then I'll be prompted that I won't be able to map an existing implementation for this property again if I select this option. So this choice is final on a per property basis. I'll hit continue, and then I'm taken to the design screen within the property that I've just created.